Welcome to Tech Confidential. I'm Mary Kathleen Flynn, and I'm at the Web 2.0 Expo conference in New York, talking with Tim O'Reilly, who's the conference organizer. Tim, you are really the person who coined the phrase Web 2.0, and your first conference back in 2004 in San Francisco led to the forming of lots and lots of new companies. So I'd love to know how your sense of Web 2.0 has changed over the last 4 years.
Well, first off, you have to understand that the core idea of Web 2.0 was that the web becoming a platform would change the rules of business. And we don't necessarily know at the outset what all those new rules are. I think I nailed a lot of them in my piece, What is Web 2.0? First is, data becomes more important than control over software APIs. It's the accumulation of data through network effects that's the very heart of Web 2.0. And I think a lot of the buzz in the industry got it wrong when they thought it was all about ad-supported startups, for example. If you look at this idea of online data and data that literally gets better the more people use it, you start to see where this starts to intersect with the enterprise, for example. Because of course, your credit card is a system that accumulates data from all its users, just as much as Google is. But what the credit card company, the bank, or the phone company hasn't figured out yet is how to build real-time services against that data. And that's the real future, I think, of Web 2.0, is how do we look at all the data that we're gathering through every application, every touch point, every device, right? So there's so much more of that coming in, and then how do we build new services against that data?
And so that's really what you're talking about when you say web meets world.
That's right, although with the current news, there's also another aspect of web meets world that I'm going to talk about a little bit about today, or not today, tomorrow in my keynote, and that is obviously, how can we use this technology to solve real world problems? There's been a lot of focus on silly consumer applications, Facebook throwing sheep, and oh my God, meanwhile, we have, economic meltdown, we have, global warming, we have oil price shocks, we have, terrible education in this country, we have dysfunctional politics. What are we doing as an industry to apply our intelligence to solve these problems? We actually need, I think, a revolution in the way we apply technology to the world's problems. And I'd love to see a lot more focus in this community on moving away from more things to consume and really tackling the hard problems of the world. And so that's kind of a call to action.
Okay, but how does that translate into companies and startups, for example?
Well, I think if you look at the history of great companies, they have always had, as Jim Collins said, big, hairy, audacious goals. And if you don't have a big, hairy, audacious goal, you're very unlikely to become a great company. Virtually every huge company in the world started with a real mission to do something important and powerful, and they took advantage of a technological revolution to make this a better world. And I think that you see that, I guess even in our own lifetime in the computer industry, Microsoft, the dominant company, they had a big, hairy, audacious goal. A computer. No, it was actually originally it was a computer on every desktop, and in every home. Meanwhile, all the titans of industry at the time said, the personal computer is just a toy. Think about Google. When they came on the scene, everybody written off search engines, there's no money to be made there, and these guys had this big, hairy, audacious goal, organize all the world's information. And I think that there are challenges that face us today that are of that scale and that will create great companies. And I think finding a problem that's really hard and really needs solving, I think, is the secret to success.
So how do you see the economy playing out in the tech industry? Some people act as if it's immune. Is that the case?
I can't predict the future there. But there's kind of a modern version of Pascal's wager. Back in the old days, Pascal once said, you're better off living a good life, believing in God, even if there is no God, because hey, you live better anyway. And right now, if you assume the worst, if you assume that there's going to be a great disaster, what would you do differently? And I want to tell people, you work on stuff that matters, because then it matters whether in good times or bad. And I think there's a kind of a great forcing function if you say, wait, this is the only world we've got. We've got to do it right. Let's take these problems seriously. I think it'll lead to successful companies in good times, and in bad times, it's a much more robust strategy for making your efforts count.
All right, before we let you go, I want to ask you about kind of a pet topic of mine right now, the now web, as
Yeah.
Don Borthwick from BetaWorks calls it.
Yeah.
This idea of the internet becoming more instantaneous in communications.
Yeah.
How important is that, and how do you see that
Well,
playing out?
I think it's really critical. One of the things that I've always said about Web 2.0, the core of Web 2.0 applications is what I would call harnessing collective intelligence. And if you think about our intelligence, it's not just our reasoning, it's our ability to respond. When you're walking down the street, now let me take a very specific example. You think about how current IT happens in the back office of a company. So people gather all this data, they analyze it, and then maybe a few days, weeks, months later, they make changes. The best Web 2.0 companies are actually automatic. To the point where, for example, Google says, hey, give us a couple of different versions of your ad copy. We'll use the one that works best. Because they have figured out right from the start that building a real-time feedback loop, it's a lot like the way our brains work. And I think
That's how my blog works. I love it.
That's right. So in some sense, Twitter is one example of that trend of just, we're moving towards that, making the electronic world an extension of the way our senses work. You're walking down the street, you see a curb, you realize, oh, I have to step down. It's not something you analyze after the fact. If you do that, you're flat on your face. Right? And I think so that real-time ambient intelligence, and I think, again, a big piece of where Web 2.0 is going, a big piece of where the opportunities are, is in understanding how to extract meaning from new kinds of sensors. Going back to the idea of a credit card company, a credit card swipe is a read of a sensor. Every phone call is a read of a sensor. And I think we're moving really out of the world in which applications are driven by people typing on keyboards, and much more into a world in which collective intelligence applications are going to be driven by the data exhaust of our devices. And I think there's some really interesting opportunities there.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, Tim O'Reilly from the Web 2.0 Expo in New York. I'm Mary Kathleen Flynn. Thanks for watching Tech Confidential's Behind the Money.